Thanks. And thanks for everyone for joining us today on the second session of our R3 Track 2 training series. Today we're going to talk about GATA compliance and specific conditions. So each one of the sessions you're going to see this same slide. We always keep everyone muted during the presentation because we are recording it, and by keeping everyone muted, we do get a higher quality recording, but we do care about your questions and what you have to say. So please use the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen for any questions, and we'll stop periodically to pick those up and to answer them. So as I said, we are being recorded, and we are going to send everyone a follow-up email after this session. A lot of it depends on when I get the recording from the good people at WebEx. So yesterday's recording went out fairly late yesterday, but we will always send a follow-up email. And we are, I think I skipped a slide there. Yep, I did. So we will be sending it to everyone who's on our contact list. We want to offer you the opportunity to add other folks from your agency to our contact list. So if you would be kind enough to send me their name, the name of your agency, I just should have written it here as well, your staff member role and their email, and send it to this email address, cja.r3training@illinois.gov. Then we'll add them to the invitations, and we'll be sure that they're on the contact list to receive the follow-up email after each session as well. Hopefully starting next week, we'll also start to post the training content on the R3 website as well, so watch for that. What we'll cover today, we're going to talk about GATA compliance, the ICQ or internal control questionnaire, the programmatic risk assessment, specific conditions, and meeting specific conditions. So we used the same slide in last Thursday's overview. These are the basic elements of GATA compliance that all of our grantees and grant recipients have to comply with. We only want to talk about a couple of them in particular today, because as we're going through the negotiation process with you, your grant specialist may be reaching out to you to kind of check in on some of these issues in the GATA compliance. So two things that they're going to be looking at is if your sam.gov registration is current, or if it's about to expire, they may ask you to work with the sam.gov people to make your registration current, because that is something that we need to have in place by the date of the execution of your agreement. So if you have an expiration date for sam.gov and sometime in October, we're going to ask you to make that registration current. So by the time your November 1st agreement starts, you'll be in good standing there. If you're a nonprofit agency, you also have to register with the Secretary of State and stay current with them as well. So that may be another issue that your grant specialist is flagging for you to work with the Secretary of State's office to get in good standing with them. And while your grant specialist can flag these issues for you, they can't do anything to help you get your sam.gov registration or your standing with the Secretary of State's nonprofit registration up to date. Those are things we can't help with, but you will have to make those current, or we won't be able to execute your agreement. We also want to talk a little bit about the Illinois no pay list. Now we have, we'll go into a lot more detail in a couple of sessions about the no pay list, but basically all of the agencies that work with GATA, that are under GATA, if you're completely out of compliance and we want to turn off the tap on the funding, you'll be placed on the no pay list. We'll go into more detail in a couple of weeks. But if when during this negotiation phase, if your grant specialist can see that you're on the no pay list, that's flagged in the GATA portal. If they see that, they'll alert you to that. But again, they won't be able to help you get back into compliance to get off of that no pay list. The way that it works is that the agency that places you on hold will be communicating with you. And so you'll have to work with them to resolve whatever issues put you on that no pay list before we can move forward with the execution of your agreement. And if the authority has been the agency that placed you on the no pay list, again, you'll have received correspondence regarding that status on the no pay list, and there'll be contact information in that correspondence. So your grant specialist can't act as a liaison on that, but they can red flag that for you so that you can pay attention to it and resolve those issues to get your agency off the no pay list. Now, two other items on that GATA compliance list that I showed you a few slides ago are the indirect cost rate and the completion of the ICQ. Now, you must elect an indirect cost rate in the GATA portal. Now, there are a couple of options that you have there, the de minimis rate. If you have a state negotiated rate, you can indicate your intent to use that rate, or if you have a negotiated federal rate, you can indicate that as well. But you have to pick one of those choices. And sometimes those things do change. For instance, you may have used the de minimis rate in the past, but then over this past year, you've negotiated a state rate with the GATA folks. And so now you want to use that state rate. So just double check that you have indicated your indirect cost rate in the GATA portal and make sure that it's the current rate that you are going to use. The other issue is the internal control questionnaire. Now, as you may recall, that's a series of questions about your financial and administrative capacity as an agency. And that's something that has to be updated every single year for the state fiscal year. So if you completed and had an approved ICQ in the GATA portal for state fiscal year 24, which ended June 30th, you're going to have to go back into the GATA portal and you're going to have to complete the state fiscal year 25 ICQ, because that's really necessary for us to move forward with the development of your grant agreement. Now, the ICQ is actually approved by your state cognizant agency, and that's typically the state agency that your agency does the most business with. So the most common one that we see is DHS. So you may have gotten grants in the past from DHS, and they're indicated as your cognizant agency. When you complete your ICQ, that goes to your cognizant agency, and they'll have assigned staff that have to review your ICQ and approve it. Now, sometimes they have questions about the way that you've completed that ICQ, and they'll be corresponding with you about that. If the authority is your cognizant agency, and there are any questions about how you've completed your ICQ, you'll have received from the staff that are working on that. So that's not something that your grant specialist will be approving or will really have a voice in approving. That's other staff at the authority. So please go back into the GATA portal, make sure that you've completed your ICQ for state fiscal year 25 and that that's been approved. We also want to talk briefly about the programmatic risk assessment. Now, that's not in the GATA portal, but it is a GATA mandated sort of supplemental assessment of administrative risk at the program level for your agency. Now, in your initial email that you've received from your grant specialist, as they start working on the development of your new grant agreement. The PRA is one of the documents that that specialist has sent to you. So the PRA, like the ICQ, has to be completed and returned to the authority, to your grant specialist, to enable them to create your grant agreement. So let's stop there, Aisha, and see if there are any questions in the chat so far.
There are no questions.
Great. So let me talk a little bit about specific conditions. So the ICQ and the PRA both identify risk of heightened administrative, financial, or programmatic risk, right? And there are actually 3 levels that these tools indicate to us. There's low risk, medium risk, and high risk. Now, the idea of the specific conditions, rather than once we've identified any elevated risk using these tools, instead of just closing the door to funding you because your agency might have some elevated risk, instead, the GATA system points us toward specific conditions that are incorporated into your grant agreement. And those are very specific steps that you need to work toward during the life of this next agreement, and so that will lower that elevated risk, right? To get you back into a low risk status. So these specific conditions provide very specific steps, very concrete steps, which your agency needs to take to lower that risk and to get to a lower risk status in the GATA portal. They also provide a very specific time frame for you to complete each of those concrete steps. So the specific conditions are based on your completion of the ICQ and the PRA, and the level of risk that those responses indicate to us. Now, you're probably wondering how you'll know if you have any elevated risk, because the ICQ doesn't flag that for you and say, oh, no, this is we need to address this. The PRA doesn't tell you that any of those responses indicate an elevated risk. But those specific conditions that are created by these 2 tools are included in both your NOSA, that Notice of State Award, which you'll receive in the GATA portal once we've kind of finished negotiating your grant agreement. And it'll also be specified, really be spelled out in your actual grant agreement. You're probably wondering what kind of specific conditions these point to. In my experience, the most common ones we see are things like they're going to require that your agency develop certain policies, such as those regarding staff training. A big one too is the development of adequate accounting systems and processes. For instance, one thing that I've seen quite a bit is that agencies may not have two folks signing off on all of your reporting, or on checks, on vouchers that go out. You need to have those checks and balances when you're dispersing funds and when you're creating the reports that come to the authority. That's a very common one. Another one is the development of procedures for record maintenance as well. So those are the kinds of questions that the ICQ and the PRA ask, and based on your responses, it's going to point us to these very concrete specific conditions that will be incorporated in your NOSA and in your grant agreement. So now how we monitor those specific conditions, because they're in your actually grant agreement, you signed off on them, that these are steps that you're going to take, and you're going to meet those time deadlines. So we internally track those specific conditions that are included in your grant agreement, and your grant specialist, who will be working with you throughout the implementation of your program over this coming year, is going to be monitoring how well you are meeting each of those time limited concrete steps that are going to lower your risk, and they're going to satisfy these specific conditions. So based on those timeframes, we set up a schedule that we monitor these specific conditions that you need to satisfy. Now, most typically, those specific conditions will set those concrete steps to be completed within 3 or 6 months. I think 6 months is by far the longest one that I've seen. So we actually give you, a real calendar that you need to meet these specific steps. And your grant specialist will be working with you to kind of check in to see how you're doing in meeting those specific conditions so you meet these deadlines that are set in your agreement. Now, during the first year of every new grant, you will have a site visit. In the past, we've been able to do them virtually. Now we're moving to bring everybody back to in-person site visits. So sometime in the coming year, hopefully earlier in the grant rather than later, you'll actually have a site visit with authority staff. And one of the things that they are going to be checking in on at that site visit is how well you're doing in satisfying those specific conditions. So we'll be talking about it before the site visit, but by that site visit, we really would like to drill down and really talk about how close you are to satisfying those conditions. And when you do satisfy those conditions, you will receive a letter from your grant specialist that will document that you've met that specific condition. We'll also have a whole training in a couple of weeks on site visits and exactly what takes place during them. But I want to mention that while there are, elements of compliance like specific conditions, to my mind, the site visit was always the best part of the job because that's when we kind of move beyond our screens and we move beyond, the letters and the emails, and we get to meet you in person and actually see the work that you do in the community. So for me, that was always the best part of the job when I get to see the folks that are doing all of this good work. So in the event that you fail to satisfy those specific conditions, there are 2 steps that we may take. First step is to issue a corrective action plan. And again, this isn't like we take the attitude that if there's an infraction that it's not like we're going to close the door on your grant, but we're going to give you a real concrete plan to address any infractions and to set real deadlines for them too, and to give you the consequences for not meeting them. So our first option is a corrective action plan. But the second option too is placement on the Illinois no pay list. And like I said, we're going to go into detail in a later session about it. But when you're placed on that Illinois no pay list, that means that none of the state agencies that participate in GATA can send you any funds, and they can't execute any agreements with you either. So that's a really big penalty, and you really don't want to get to that place. So I would really encourage you, if you do have specific conditions in your note included in the NOSA and in your grant agreement, to really pay attention to those and make sure that you're working to satisfy those conditions so that you can be in good standing. Now I dropped the ball here and I didn't get this training over to the folks who create the surveys for us. We really do care about how your feedback on these training sessions. We really do read your survey results. So in the follow-up email that I'm going to send later today, I will have the link to the survey, and I'd appreciate it if you can fill it out. Tell us how we're doing with it, and what we can do better. But let me stop here for some questions. Aisha, are there any questions in the chat?
There's one question. My indirect cost rate says waive for February 1st, 24 through January 31st, 25. Should I update the year?
I'm sorry, can you read that for me again? I couldn't hear you very well.
My indirect cost rate says waive for February 24 through January 31st, 25. Should I update the year?
You're going to waive it for you've elected to waive the indirect costs this year. If that's still accurate, that's fine. If there's been a change, if you're going to take de minimis, you're going to elect de minimis, then I would update that. I think you can always update that. Throughout it's not tied to the state fiscal year like the ICQ is. So if there's been any change, you can always go into the portal and update your election of the indirect cost rate. So are there any other questions, Aisha?
Nope, that's it.
Hey, that was easy. So our next trainings, as I said, indirect costs and documenting expenses is going to be next Wednesday, October 2nd. And one thing that if you were on yesterday's call where we talked about cost allowability and executive compensation, we did have a lot of questions about that. And in the follow-up email that I sent yesterday evening, we also included the executive compensation guidance and a number of the policies that your grant specialists are using as they review your your budgets that you've submitted with your applications. So we wanted to give you a little time to kind of digest all of that information, but I do want to circle back around next Wednesday session to see if you have any more questions on the executive compensation now that you've had a chance to read that executive compensation guidance that went out in the follow-up email yesterday. And then next Thursday, we're going to be talking about dispersal methods. And so we'll drill down into each of those dispersal method options, which you'll be talking with your grant specialist about as you work toward execution of your agreement. Looks like there are a couple of other comments that came up in the chat, Aisha.
Yes. So Yolanda's follow-up was around just to follow up around the last question that asked about updating the indirect cost rate. So she was asking, should she update it for November 1st, 24 through October 31st, 25?
Yes, I mean, we want to make sure that that election is current and you're not tied to the state fiscal year like the ICQ. So you can go into the GATA portal and update that indirect cost rate election if it has changed at all. And you feel free to go into the portal now and to update the dates for us.
Okay. Another question. Is this a multi-year grant?
I'm going to let you answer that one, Aisha.
The period of performance is currently 12 months for this particular grant. There is potential for it to be extended up to 36 months, but that is determined on an annual basis. Next question. How far out do we block our schedules for Wednesday and Thursday webinars?
I beg your pardon, you want the schedule? I sent it out with last night's update email or follow-up email, but I'll be glad to send it out again with the follow-up email for today's session. And that's actually, I'm glad you asked that question because hopefully next week we'll also be posting this training material on the R3 website. But I'll give you those updates next week on October 2nd if we go live with the website with the training stuff up there as well. So the idea is that in addition to sending you the follow-up emails and all the invitations that you've got to these sessions, that if you've missed one or got a new staff member that joins, Sometimes throughout the course of this 12-month agreement, there's some shift in your staffing, and now somebody that's new to the organization could use some of this information that we're covering in this, initial training series, that you'll be able to always go to to the R3 website and to catch up on all of these trainings that we're offering during the first months. So hopefully early next week, we'll have that up for you as well, but we'll let you know as soon as it goes live.
Great. There are a few people that said they didn't receive yesterday's follow-up, and another request to have the information resent to their email address. Outside of that, there are no more questions.
Great. Then if anybody would like to receive yesterday's follow-up email, but they didn't receive it, if you'd be kind enough to put your email address and your name in the chat, we'll copy the chat and make sure that we add you to the follow-up. We have something like, I think we're inching close to 200 folks that are on our contact list now, because it's very rarely that an agency has just one person who needs all of this range of information that we're going to be covering through the training sessions. So if you would just make sure that you add that to the chat, and then we'll make sure that you receive it. But watch for it to show up on the website as well. And let's see what else I wanted to tell you. I think that's about it. So I know what I wanted to say is that those emails aren't coming from me. They're coming from that cja.r3training@illinois.gov address instead, because it comes from the team and not particularly from me. And also, so I can segregate this information from the rest of my mailbox. So watch for those emails from cja.r3training@illinois.gov. That's where the follow-up emails will come from. Any other questions, Aisha, or should we call it a day?
No question.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone very much for joining us today. We're looking forward to seeing you next Wednesday.